So if we're going to do those estimates, we want to make sure that we can estimate in a variety of ways. And we spoke about those ways in our prior demonstration video about the sales component. So to reiterate that, estimates can have be brought into a project right from a project template. So if you have some standard packages or if you have some standard estimating, those can be ready and waiting for you in the estimating area to select and be able to have maybe a slight adjustment before it's sent over to the client for sign-off. We can always add a new estimate in from scratch, and at that point in the labor selection, we can either go task by task and manually choose what services we're going to need and how much time of those for each task. Or my personal preference, since I've already developed my plan in my schedule, I'm going to pull that information right in from my project schedule, and that way I know I have not missed anything that I planned for. So as you can see, task by task, the system is now showing what we planned in our project schedule as labor we're estimating for. I can adjust this further from here and ultimately push that back into my schedule. So I do have a push or pull philosophy that I can incorporate in this. Another item I want to point out is the value of our services. So as you can see in my estimate here, I have different values for each of my different services. This is coming from the rate sheet on the client record. So you can have a variety of different rate sheets in Workamajig, but default on the client record which rate sheet would you predominantly use for this client, so that each time we create a project for that client, Workamajig is going to recognize this is their rate sheet of choice and naturally apply it to that project. If you have the security rights to make adjustments to financials, you could toggle to a different rate sheet or even manually edit these rates. But again, you have to have the appropriate security rights to do those types of financial adjustments. We could also be adding expenses in. So if we're anticipating any out-of-pocket costs for services or production, we want to make sure that we can have that included in our budget so we can track our actuals against it. To the right here, you can see I'm getting an anticipated profit margin for this project, which is great because we want to make sure we're planning for a profit, and this will help us maintain those levels. For the labor at net in this profitability reporting here, it's coming from what I've established in my system, a blended rate for my services. So for example, if I have 5 designers, each one on their employee record may have a different cost to the firm because they make different money. But when I'm estimating and I don't know who is going to work on this yet, I still want to get that anticipated profit margin, at least an estimate of it. So I have a labor blended net on my services so that I can get this information and know that I'm in a good range, that ultimately as this project progresses, if we move forward, we're going to see the actuals when they come in based on who is ultimately updating this project with their time. Now, this can certainly be distributed out of the system, and I can email it, I can download it, I can print it. How this is going to appear is completely up to you. I have a very, very simple, not so pretty estimate layout, but there is a full design tool in Workamajig so that you can manage your logos, your fonts, what fields you'd like, where you'd like them to be placed. And when we're looking at the information we're providing, how detailed are we going to be? Are we going to give them one line for our services and maybe break out the expenses? Or are we going to give a great amount of detail? Again, completely up to each firm to decide what their needs are so they can develop their variable layouts for these client-facing pieces. And just like with the rate sheets, we're going to default that on the client record so that each time we create an estimate or ultimately an invoice for that client, Workamajig knows when it's time for this to go client-facing, what information are we going to display? And aesthetically, how are we going to display it? Approving of this estimate is going to provide me with a budget for this project. How one reviews a budget oftentimes is going to depend on what your intention at that time is, or maybe what your role is to that project. So we usually see some folks that are intensely managing that project take a deep dive look by task because they want to see task by task, how have I budgeted and how are any actuals being applied as that is progressing. They can even see the details within those tasks and how any actuals are happening. So ultimately, the system can let us know with a notification the moment you go over budget on any task or service along the way, so we can discover the why. Do we just need to get a change order out there because the scope of the project changed in concepting? Or did we blow the budget? It happens. But at least if we know immediately, we can manage that, hopefully make it up for the rest of the project, but at least make sure it doesn't have that proverbial snowball effect through our project. Others tend to look at things at a higher level by item. Just separate out your labor and expenses. How have you budgeted? And how are any actuals being applied as that project's progressing? All actuals in these screens are drill downs. And for demonstration purposes, I keep things very simple, but ultimately you get to decide of all of these variable fields, what do you want on your budget? And when you've decided what fields you want to display, you'll also decide what order you'd like them to be displayed in. That will then template the budget screens for you, and you won't be interfering with how one of your peers might be looking at budgets because what their intention for their viewing might be different from yours. Once we get that budget approved, that's oftentimes when we're going to put that project into an active project status. And what that means is that this project is now going to be considered active in the system. It's going to show up in my active project reporting, in my active project board, as well as my resource and utilization reporting. And we're definitely going to get into resourcing in our next video, so we'll see how this all affects in the next portion. One thing you can do, if you do have account teams, so if you have a team of people who are assigned to a client, you can default that team on the client record, and that way those folks will automatically show up in the team of that project to be assigned. If you don't have account teams, we usually see folks leaving the project assigned out to what kinds of resources we're requesting for this project and what we've budgeted for. And those, again, will show up in our resourcing screens so that our resource manager, traffic manager, department head, or whomever you've designated as the person to oversee that information can go to one screen, see what everybody has on their plate, what is still out there that needs to get assigned out, who's available that can provide those skill sets, and make sure that those get assigned out in a timely fashion to the right components and the right people. Now, as you can see, there's a lot to a project, lots of different pieces. Not everybody has access to every piece of a project. That's, again, going to be based on our security rights. We do have a selection for your files area, and typically we will connect right to your local file server, whether it's a Mac or a PC. As an alternative, we can also connect to a cloud-based file storage solution, which is becoming more and more common. So maybe use an Amazon S3 or a Box account for that. We do that connection with a WebDAV server that we provide, and once we've established that connection between Workamajig and your file server of choice, that will then allow us to have your folder structure for your projects automatically created on your file server the moment you create a new project. And if I go and ultimately upload a file into a project, I'm technically not uploading anything into Workamajig. I'm uploading that file into this project's file folder on my file server through Workamajig. Likewise, if I'm working from home or just out and about and I need one of those files, I can download those files from the file server through Workamajig. There is security around this as well, so you control who has access to these folders and files and what type of access that might be. There's an ongoing audit trail of them as well.